Okay, so like we said, in 1850, something has to give because prior to 1850, California is not a state. California very quickly becomes one in 1850, and that's not going to make the South happy. It keeps the North happy. They like California being added as a free state. They also like the fact that the slave trade is banned here in Washington, D.C. You're still allowed to have slaves, you just can't trade them here in our nation's capital. So the South has to get something to make them happy. This territory over here that we got from Mexico, the Utah territory up here, and the New Mexico territory down here, it's not going to be bound to that Missouri Compromise line. Like we said before, it's supposed to be that everything north of that line is going to be free, south of it is going to be slave. But the Compromise of 1850, it makes it so these territories are going to get to vote on whether they're going to be slave or free. Um, so that makes them happy. They also get the fugitive slave law. Now, the fugitive slave law is nothing new. There's been a law since the beginning of our country saying that if slaves run away, they have to be returned. But this does really three things: it creates slave catchers, and it requires all Americans now, even people living up here in free territories, all Americans are now obligated to do what they can to return a suspected runaway slave to their masters. So you've got to snitch, you've got to keep your eyes open, all people, even up here in the free North. And then the last thing it does is since it gets rid of jury trials for suspected runaway slaves, essentially, if you're a black person accused of being a runaway, you're done. Unless you have your free papers on you, you are going to be taken to slavery, regardless of whether you are actually a runaway or not, because there is no guarantee of a jury trial. And in fact, local magistrates were paid more money if they ruled slaves to be runaways than they were for them to rule that they were actually a free person. Seems pretty crooked. Then we keep progressing after 1850, and you can see that starting in 1854, something weird is happening in Kansas here. Now, um, from 1820, the Compromise of 1820, all of this land up here was supposed to be free. But the Kansas Nebraska Act of 1854, it said that Nebraska and Kansas, they could vote on whether or not they wanted to become slave or free. Nebraska is mostly free, so they end up voting that they're going to be a free territory. Kansas, on the other hand, shares a border with Missouri. And starting in 1854, when they announced this decision, thousands of Missourians, they come across the border into Kansas to try to make sure that their vote wins. When Northerners hear of that, they start rushing there as well. And when all is said and done, after the election to decide whether it's going to be slave or free, in some places, 5 times as many votes as were supposed to be cast were actually cast. So let's say that a town had 1,000 free men to vote. There were some places that had 5,000 votes. So it's very fixed, very rigged, and it upsets both sides. When all is said and done, Kansas ends up being a slave territory, but that doesn't matter. The anti-slavery people, the free staters, they set up their own constitution. So do the pro-slavery people. You have two governments set up at the same time trying to rule over Kansas. So that creates some conflict. And people like John Brown, a northerner from over here in Ohio and New York, he spent some time there as well. He leads a a massacre in Potawatomi, Kansas, where he and his followers they kill 5 people with swords, trying to get people to understand that slavery is wrong and this should be a free state and all of that stuff. So you can see that as we progress, this bloodshed and this chaos continues in Kansas through the 1850s. In 1858, Minnesota becomes a free state. Then we keep going. In 59, Oregon becomes a free state. And now our total is at 18 free states to 15 slave states. And this is just spelling disaster for our country. Here we are in 1860, about ready to elect our new president. And you're going to have people that are very upset about the institution of slavery and what to do with it. Yeah.